that Friday night, I remember going out of my house and looking to the neighboring yeshuv that we used to see. That was Ganei Tal, all dark. And the first thing that popped into my head was Rabbi Akiva looking at the Beis Hamikdash there with the fox coming out. And that's what I felt then.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Start Tank. Start Tank is a podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. And we always try before different events of the year to focus a little bit on Inyani Dioma, even though maybe it's a little bit of a different style episode. And I thought that this year, with the 20th anniversary, 20 years since the Girush from Gush Katif coming up, it happened right around Tisha B'Av, would be an appropriate time to talk about it. And I'm very pleased to be sitting here with Rav Ari Katz, who I've known for a very long time, been connected to my family for a very long time, who was in Gush Katif, and we're going to talk about that. So Rav Ari, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to sort of bookend the conversation about Gush Katif, talk a little bit about your life before that, during, and after. So let's start with the before. Tell us a little about where you grew up, your Aliyah story, and your early life.
So I grew up as a kid. I was in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And then my parents, exactly 45 years ago this summer, they made Aliyah. And I always say, and I have, every child should have a hakaras hatov to his parents, but I say that life-changing thing, I was 12 and a half years old, but still, them making that decision for me, I thank them ad hayom hazeh, because I think that really structured my life, what I became, who I am, what my kids are, like my grandchildren are. I mean, the whole life it affects. True that I left with my wife and then two kids on shlichut to Memphis for a 5-year shlichut. So then I came back. So like I said, I did Aliyah myself. But bottom line, like I said, it's my parents. High school, of course, I was in Yerushalayim in Netiv Meir. Then I was in Churban B'Yavne. Basically, at one point, I was in Churban B'Yavne for half of my life. I was there as a talmid. My first job was in Churban B'Yavne as madrich. Therefore, I know your father. He was at my wedding. So we do go back a long way. And after I got my smicha, my teacher's degree, then we went on shlichut to Memphis. We came back after 5 years back to KBY for, again, 5 years. The 5 years of my life has been and then in 2004, I said this a few times to people, and I definitely think I made a decision which I think really changed my life. Just the way I see things and think things and experience something. And we moved to Gush Katif in 2004 to Moshav Katif. And unfortunately, we were only there for 13 months. But I say it was 13 months in quantity, but quality was like 13 years. And after Gush Katif, after the Gerush, or the disengagement, went politically correct. So I came back to Churban B'Yavne. And I was in Churban B'Yavne until I was always in chinuch there. And then the board in Churban B'Yavne asked me to take over from Mr. Eli Klein, alav shalom. I don't know if we could take over for Eli Klein. He was my mentor, and I was the executive director from 2006 till basically to 2014. And a year later, I left, and basically I've been in Sderot since then, and the Hesed Yeshiva in Sderot for the last 9.5 years.
Wow, so I also made Aliyah when I was 12 and a half years old, but I'm assuming that there weren't nearly as many resources and baseball leagues and other things. So what was that like for you, just coming as a not so young kid?
I say the sacrifice is more my parents, man. Like you talking about sports. So if people ask me, what was my father's big story? My father is a big sports fan. That's where I got it from. So I think the sports was my mother. Yeah, then you're right. 45 years ago, like there wasn't a lot of things that there are today regarding resources, but Baruch Hashem, I say a lot of siyata d'shmaya. My sister and my brother, alav shalom, we all fit in. We all acclimated very nicely. I was really in 8th grade, so even that, which was a hard grade to come to, but my Hebrew dafka was okay. People laughed. So where do you learn the Hebrew? I go, well, in JC in Elizabeth. So back then I had a very good Hebrew teacher. We went to Ulpan that summer, but in general, I can really say that we really had we acclimated well. We got in B'nai Akiva and just in society in general. My parents, Baruch Hashem, also. And yeah, and thank God, like I said, I know the fact that I'm here today and, a certain way of life. And I look at it and say, yeah, sometimes in life you make a decision and you go either right to the left, and that depends. And I could look back and say this was, like I said, my parents, their decision really shaped who I am. And I only thank them for it.
And the decision to get smicha, a teacher's degree, go into education. Tell me a little more about what that was like.
So when I went to, I always liked teaching, I always liked learning. And when I was in Churban B'Yavne, Baruch Hashem, the learning was very good and productive. And I was as Zoche, I was privileged to be very close to the Rosh Yeshiva Zatzal of Goldwicht. And so like smicha wasn't even a question. That's something I wanted. I liked teaching. I liked being in the classroom. I liked talking. And so those two things, the smicha and the teacher's degree. And then really what happened, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you along your life, simanim. So when I finished my smicha and my teacher's degree, it was a crossroad again, and the Rosh Yeshiva then was leaving. So everything was, and I said, oh, you know what? I always wanted to do shlichut. I always felt that to go back to America and to be able to contribute there but I had a tonight, like I had an offer from Teaneck, New Jersey. Teaneck, New Jersey back then wasn't what it was today, but it was still, and I said, I'm not going to leave Eretz Yisrael where there's a dime a dozen like myself. I want to go to a community where I'll have an impact. So I was looking for smaller communities. Then again, Mishamayim, one of my Talmidim in Keren B'Yavneh, he tells me the guys knew that I was looking. And, he tells me, listen, my former principal, who now is in Memphis, Tennessee, is here. So I never heard of Memphis. I don't know about Elvis Presley. I didn't know there was any Torah there. And one thing led to another. And Baruch Hashem, this was 5, very good. But we knew for a fact, we went for 3. And then, again, my wife, really, I owe this to her. When the Balabatim in the community wanted me to stay on, I said, listen, talk to my wife. You're never going to convince her, but, please be my guest. And I don't know, my best friend there spoke to her, convinced her. So I'm staying 5. When they wanted me to stay after 5, I said, no, Adkan. My daughter was already going to 5th grade, Kitahei. It says, they were trying to convince me, no, the school here is good. I said, no, you don't understand. I want my kids in Israel, just like when my parents made Aliyah. So it was a great time, 5 years. And Ada Yom Hazeh, I have a connection with this community in Memphis. So Baruch Hashem, really, it was those 5 years were a very good opportunity for me. And then I came back to Keren B'Yavneh. Even though when we left Keren B'Yavneh, there wasn't a given that we were coming back. I'll tell you a funny thing. We started one of our summers that we were back here for a Bikur Moledet during the Shlichut. So we bought our first house in Beit El. I was able to do that from the money we saved in Shlichut. So when people say, yeah, Shlichut, you could save money if you. And the plan was come back, maybe live there, and then work in Yerushalayim. I was in touch with, then it was Hakotel before the split. But of course, Eretz Yisrael Neknet B'Yisurim, the building's not on time. The house was not ready when we came back. So Keren B'Yavneh, invited me to come back, and I came back to Keren B'Yavneh and told my next time I exited, which was Gush Katif.
So before we get to 2004 and your experience in the Girush, maybe we should take a step back and tell the listeners who are familiar or less familiar about, like, what was Gush Katif? What was it like? What were the people like? How many people were there?
Of course. So Gush Katif, which before we moved there, I probably was there once before. Gush Katif, if we talk historically, what is Gush Katif? So now, because of what's going on the last 22 months, I think people understand where the Gaza Strip is. We're now in Sderot, so we're a mile away from the border. And after the 6-Day War, remember, let's go back a little more in history. From 1948 until 1967, we bordered Egypt. And then in 1967, after the war, Baruch Hashem, we won, and we took control of the Gaza Strip, which the Egyptians lost. And then a couple of years later, like they did in Yehuda and Shomron, they decided to build cities there. Because, that's what happened in Yehuda and Shomron. And the anecdote here is a lot of the first people who moved to Gush Katif were people who were thrown out of Yamit. Yamit, if I remind the listeners, that was the first time that we gave back land.
In 67, we got Sinai there.
Right, and Sinai, and what was the Gaza Strip as well. And Sinai, when we wanted to make a peace treaty with Egypt, part of the peace treaty with Egypt in 1976, 77 was they wanted Sinai back. So the people who were living in Sinai after the 6-Day War were thrown out. They had to leave once.
Those were like Chilonim, right?
And many of those people were the first ones that resettled Gush Katif. And what can I say? A beautiful oasis, a Gan Eden. I remember just seeing it. I mean, you have to, I don't like to compare it to anywhere in America because it doesn't do justice. But yeah, it was like, the beaches, the most beautiful beaches you see. Beautiful area, palm trees, sand, the sea. And what came out of what the people did there, it's an unbelievable piece of work. I mean, they built their communities. Before we came there, the Arabs couldn't grow anything agriculturally wise. And here all of a sudden, the Jews coming there were growing stuff. And that's where all the plants without insects started. And it was like, like I said, an oasis in the middle of the desert. By 2004, there were around 10,000 people living there. Over 20 communities were there. Some smaller, some larger. And really a beautiful, now true, the security, so let's divide this up like this, security-wise. Until the Oslo Accords in 1993, and this people tell me, and when I tell people, it's hard for them to believe how life was before. But yes, when we first moved there, when people, not me, when people first moved to Gush Katif, to the Gaza Strip, so they got along with the Arabs. I mean, you heard stories of the first people moving there. They went to Arab doctors, Arab dentists, Arab driving instructors. They used to go to the shuk. I mean, people cannot understand that today, after especially what we've gone through the last 20 years, but there was a good relation. And I always claim, and I mean, it might be a political statement, but I believe it. The Arabs respect when you basically show them respect and you show that you're the Balabait, they respect that. And that's what was after the 6-Day War. They knew we won the war. They were still afraid of us. And we had a good relationship. The minute that we flinched first and started talking about giving this and giving back and did this, making all these, just showing weakness. So that's when trouble started. So when Oslo happened, and to remind the listeners what the Oslo Accords were, that was President Clinton, Prime Minister Rabin, and Yasser Arafat, with the PLO back then, that they were going to give the Arabs autonomy, the freedom to rule themselves. And part of that whole structure, what they signed on the White House law, and the famous picture, was that the Arabs in Judea, in Yehuda and Shomron, and in the Gaza Strip, would basically have certain areas that only belonged to them. Eventually, they would have also a police force that we would train, and we would give them guns, and that's when things basically went south. Now, my first, I would say, acquaintance with Gush Katif was really my Miluim. My first Miluim was right after the first Intifada. A little more history. First Intifada started in November of '87. And I remember the first Intifada was throwing rocks. They didn't have guns then. This was before Oslo. And I was in Totchanim. I was in artillery. And they sent us to patrol over there in the Gaza Strip. Yeah, we used to get pelted by rocks. But for some reason, our unit went there for a number of times. It was there in May of '88, November of '88, in '89. I mean, we always used to go back. So I tell my kids now, I left all these refugee camps that have become the most radical ones, where even yesterday they started at Dir al-Balach, Nuseirat. We were there. Now, when we were there, nothing was happening. There was but how things changed very quickly. So I already knew then. And then, this I even forgot to say to people last night. After the Oslo Accords, I was in Keren B'Yavneh still. But Amana is, the organization that basically builds in Yehuda and Shomron. And Gaza, they were looking for people to give chizuk to the people there, because after the Oslo, of course, people were down. I mean, it was important to show that we're not giving up and we're still building. So we were at Keren B'Yavneh then still. 2 kids, 2 small kids. But I wanted to do something. We asked them, can we still remain like with our jobs, with learning in Keren B'Yavneh, and us getting something in somewhere? Well, the closest thing to Keren B'Yavneh would be somewhere in Gush Katif. So they gave us and another family 2 caravans in Kfar Darom, which was one of the main communities in Gush Katif. So that was, we moved. I remember our first night in Kfar Darom was Seder Tu B'Shvat.
What year?
This was 1994. Short-lived, because 6 weeks later, I remember, we used to go back and forth. We used to get up early in the morning, come to Keren B'Yavneh, drive the little kids to put them in Gan, and then go on a day and then go back at night. And then for Shabbos, we used to leave Thursday and spend their Shabbos. So we got to know the community a little bit. But 6 weeks later, the Baruch Goldstein happened in Hebron, and things got a little bit more wild, and that's basically when we stopped. And then a few months later, we went to Memphis. So that was my first really acquaintance with, so I really lived in Gush Katif 10 years before we moved there afterwards.
So it was such a beautiful community, and I'm just curious, I always wonder, like all the farming, what's known as like the Gush Katif vegetables. So like, what was the impetus to that? Like, why specifically there in Gush Katif did these amazing innovations happen?
That's a good question. I wanted to say, because the land, it was just every place in the country has an area which is good for growing certain crops. This was on the beach near the water. Somehow they were able to do the agriculture there and do this stuff. Now, but that's the whole idea, that the Arabs couldn't do it. So we came there and we were able to do it. Now, I'll just say it as an anecdote. After the Gerush happened in 2005, so the Prime Minister at the time, Sharon, and they said to the farmers, "Don't worry, we're going to give you the farms again." So farmers said, "You don't understand farming. What we could grow in that area of the country, you're going to put us somewhere else. Who says we're able to grow the same thing? It doesn't work like that." Okay. So that was, part of the, right, let's just say, Meshugas, that was part of the whole disengagement. But I want to go back, Yaakov, to what you asked before. The people in Gush Katif, So I said this a few times, and I remember the first time. Like, remember, I'm coming from Tisha B'Av, and they're more or less of a ghetto. Everyone's the same. Everyone's in learning. And it really was my first time in Israel. I was in Shlichut in Memphis, in Israel, living in a community where people are different, doing different things. Now, our community was religious, but there were non-religious communities. Now, we used to have like these town hall meetings during that year. And I remember hearing people from the non-religious community speaking, and you would think these guys are like rabbanim. The way they were speaking with such emuna and bitachon, you say, oh my gosh, like if you close your eyes, you wouldn't even know if he had a kippah on or not. And the guy speaking with so much belief in Eretz Yisrael. I mean, that's why I say these farmers, the land connects you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it doesn't matter if you have a yarmulke or not. The fact that you're connected to the land, that already, okay, doesn't matter if you have a yarmulke or not. That is the essence of their whole belief and everything else. That's why even the non-religious people there, where I always say we're at a level which I was always amazed by the level of people there.
Right. So you moved in 2004. So let's also maybe go through like the history of the Girush, because 2014 were already happening.
Right. 2004. I'll tell you the story. How happened for us. 2004. It was on the table already that they were talking already about what they called then the disengagement. No one knew exactly what was that going to mean, but it was definitely on the table. But my story, and like I said before, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends you simanim. So if you remember May of 2004, so that was because there was a talk on the table, Yom Ha'atzmaut, then already people came down to, a week later, Prime Minister Sharon at the time, agreed to have a referendum with the Likud member party. If you were a Likud member, you could vote. So it was exactly a week after Yom Ha'atzmaut. I think it was Yud Aleph Iyar. I remember the Hebrew date. I'll explain why I remember the Hebrew date, unfortunately. So the Likud members went to vote. Now, everyone understood that if the referendum would be against it, but that's a side point right now. The incident that happened that day, look, there were a lot of people, unfortunately, who in Gush Katif gave their lives. A lot of terrorist attacks. I mean, there was one road in, one road out. On that road, a lot of terrorist attacks. And the story that happened that day of the referendum, the Chatuel family living in Moshav Katif, David Chatuel, his wife Tali, their 4 girls, she was 9 months pregnant. David Chatuel was a principal in Ashkelon. And the family, the mother and the 4 little girls were driving to one of the polling booths. That was the idea, that the people in Gush Katif that day would go to the polling booths and try to convince the voters to vote against the plan. And on the way out, they were ambushed by Arab terrorists. Terrible story. And we know for a fact that afterwards, the terrorists even went up to the car, made sure they were all killed. You're talking about little kids from 2 years old to 10 years old. And that story, also, when that happened, I mean, there was terrorist attacks. Remember, we're talking about, the years of the Second Intifada, a lot of it, but that really made an impression on me. And then that week, or maybe the week later, I don't know how many of the listeners remember, the religious newspaper at the time was the Hatzofeh. That was the Mafdal's paper. And Tisha B'Av, the Rabbeim used to get it. It used to come like 10. I used to always take one also. It was like, the whole paper was 6 pages. But the Friday one was a little bit bigger. And that Friday, I think it was either right after the murder or the week after. And I see an ad in the paper that they're looking for a Rosh Yeshiva for the Yeshiva High School in Katif. And so I didn't even tell anyone. I just sent my resume by fax, and it was fax still. And I said, whatever, because I said, I wanted to do something, especially after that happened with the talk of the disengagement. And what do you know, on, I think already Sunday or Monday, I get a call. This was the Tzviya, the chain of Tzviya schools. I should come down for an interview. So I made a joke that I don't know how many crazy people wanted this job like me, but I come down, and I still remember the interview. That Rav Eitan Eisman was the head. That he unfortunately lost, I think, 2 grandchildren in this last war, down the war. And we talked and we schmoozed, and very nice people. And remember what he said to me after? He goes, listen, you're an interesting guy. You're an American, a rabbi without a beard. But, maybe this could work. So why tomorrow you go with one of our guys and he shows you the yeshiva. And yeah, the next day we went down. And let's just say it was, then of course, I already told my wife. And it was like love at first sight. I went down, and I remember seeing the yeshiva high school and going there and seeing and then I remember we went to eat watermelon on the beach over there. And yeah, basically I told Tisha B'Av that I'm leaving. And this I remember. So yeah, there was talk about that. Already it was the summer of 2004 that it was almost definitely going to happen. But when I left Keren B'Yavneh, I told then at the time, Mr. Eli Klein, the executive director of Shalom, I told him, he says to me, if you could come back next year, I go, no. I said, I told people, I really, that when we moved, I believed nothing would happen. And I said, I did a simple cheshbon. How many times during history, especially those years in the 1990s, there was talk about the Golan, giving it back. And okay, they used to talk about it, get it out of the system, like I said, and then the same thing's going to happen here. Okay, they're talking about, so what? Okay, Eretz Hashem will move there. And that's why, they wanted me to leave some stuff there. I said, no. We're moving. Like, it's not like a joke. It's not, we're moving everything. And hopefully we won't be back. Nothing against Keren B'Yavneh, but that was the plan. After Lamafrei, I always say that the only person who could have done what happened and gone through it was Sharon, because Sharon was a bulldozer for the good, like the Yom Kippur War. He did unbelievable stuff, and for the bad, what happened?
People don't realize it was basically the equivalent of Ben Gvir pulling up thousands of Jews out of Yiddish.
Exactly. That was Sharon, and Sharon could do it. Why did he do it? When people ask me, why did the government do that? So the official answer was always, we thought that if we would unilaterally pull out, it would cause peace. Everyone knew that's a government. And I remember the things that during the last couple of months, even before that, when the votes in the Knesset were finalizing the plan, trying to convince those who were against it, basically saying, you understand, we have to remember, again, sitting here in Sderot, that already in 2001, they were able to shoot rockets which was unbelievable, because we're there, there's Israeli presence there, the army is there. Okay, but they can only shoot to Sderot. They're able to make these like really primitive rockets. But we said to them, if we leave, and there won't be anyone there, not us, not the army. So you understand, there are going to be rockets not only Sderot, on Ashdod, Ashkelon, Tel Aviv, and then at the time, and everything is documented. No one can deny anything. So he said, they used to say, no, they're just scaring you. Sharon's famous statement, the first rocket they'll shoot after we leave will flatten Gaza. So, like I say, 20 years later, Baruch Hashem, Gaza is more or less flattened, not because of Sharon.
Right.
Okay, so that's
Right. So let's there's so much to talk about, and I want to try to fit in as much as we can. So during that year you were there, there's obviously many efforts to stop it and to protest. You already mentioned the Hatuels were going out to be active and whatever. And that sort of touches on one of the really deep traumas in this whole issue, is that obviously living a part of Eretz Yisrael and having your homes destroyed and giving over to our enemies and all that is awful. But then you say that it's Jews who are doing it, and Tzal and the Israeli government. So how did you guys find that balance of protesting as hard as you could, but at the end of the day, the people you're protesting against and the people you're resisting against in certain cases, in certain ways, there were different disagreements, were Jews.
right. So like I said, every Nisayon has its levels. For now, the last 22 months, we have an enemy we're fighting against. What made it harder back then was that wasn't an enemy. It was our own brothers. And of course, that made it harder. And the ridiculous thing that they tried to do and use it against the people in Gush Katif was that they were basically saying, they're trying to make us look bad, the people living in Gush Katif bad. They said that what's going to happen is that the soldiers are going to come. The first, that the government was going to use the soldiers to do this thing. That in itself was crazy, because the soldiers are not supposed to, that's not part of what they're supposed to throw people out of their homes.
So is there an alternative plan?
Well, they could have used the police. The results of what happened in the summer of 2005, you saw the next year in 2006, the Second Lebanon War, because everyone almost agrees today, the fact that the army was not prepared for that war a lot was because, if you're spending millions of dollars and resources to train soldiers to kick people out of their homes, and I'm telling you, they spent a lot of money and time training that they trained. What do you expect? I mean, you're supposed to be fighting a war against enemies, not doing this, okay? So, and of course, but the people in Gush Katif, going back what I told you about the people in Gush Katif, they were the kindest people ever. No one was going to raise their hands. And in a way, they used that against us because they knew that but to the public, they were saying that's why a few weeks before, when the plan started being implemented, they took the guns away from everyone, because they were afraid that we were going to use those guns now, which was ridiculous again. But it was more ridiculous. You're taking away guns from the people living there, that the guns are protect them from the neighbors that are living around them. That's really smart. So now you're endangering them even more. So, of course, they knew the fine line. So to protest and everything, just like now, this last 22 months, protesting is part of democracy. If it's done, of course, legally. I'm going to say this now, Yaakov, even though it might be politically correct, but now people complain now that the police uses force against the protesters, that are, in Tel Aviv all the time and blocking the roads there. Let's just say that what happened, when people have a very short memory, because what happened 20 years ago, 21 years ago, that last year, I mean, that teenagers were arrested, that teenagers were booked, that they had files, that they had to even pass a law afterwards. Like, so now people have that memory. You're complaining now that the police are too hostile. And that back then there were teenagers there's a famous story that teenagers just used to go off the sidewalk first, put their foot, the police used to arrest them. I think today people can't be hypocritical. And then people have to remember what happened then. It was crazy. Sad, I would say. Very sad because, now if I jump to what happened afterwards, most people today, first of all, who were part of the plan, there was the slogan, Lo nishkach v'lo nislach. That was part of the slogans they used. We won't forget, we won't forgive. So by not forgiving, I'm not going to go into no, not forgetting, I think, and when we talk about that, is very important because I think, Baruch Hashem, we've succeeded in not forgetting. Not forgiving, just on the contrary. What happened was, it's famous stories that before that Yom Kippur of 2005, soldiers they called families to ask them for mechila. Unfortunately, lo aleinu, there were soldiers that committed suicide after they did that. Okay. So the whole thing was to have, your own flesh and blood throw you out of your houses. And I can tell you from own experience, the soldiers that came to our house, I mean, they were like robots. You saw they were trained like not to engage in any conversations. Now, you can be a robot, but look, you saw a lot of people, their emotions overcome that. And then you're a human being and that. But yeah, it was the saddest thing to see. I remember the day they came in. First, we used to see the pictures from the other communities. When they came to our community, they used to come in. They came in the morning with their black vest. I mean, it reminded you of the darkest times in our history. So it was a very hard nisayon. But Baruch Hashem, the people in Gush Katif stood up to that nisayon. No one lifted a hand. Some people were dragged out. Okay, I could say I'm not going to try to cover up stuff. The language that was used maybe against them was something, I don't think there was any foul language. It was yelling, but what can you expect? You're about to lose your whole living, your home, your family is going to have to be removed. You're losing your jobs and everything. What can you expect? So it was a very hard nisan. Like I said, in a way, what we've gone through the last 22 months, it's a lot easier when you have an enemy that you're all against than when you really don't have an enemy. It's your own people doing it.
So obviously, I'm sure it's one of the toughest days of your life. But I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what your memories are of that awful day.
Sure. So if you allow me, I will say one more thing about, you asked about this. There were a lot of strong emuna questions asked, especially by the teenagers. I had the privilege of being the Rosh Yeshiva of the boys' high school there, and in normal times you have high school age kids who have questions about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This made things worse. I mean, this questions which you don't any answer you give is not like you're going to tell them Hashem has a plan. That's try that on a 15-year-old. It was very hard. That was made more. And some people went off the derech. So there were cases the opposite because they were so upset. These kids, they didn't go into the army right away. They were learning yeshiva more so you had both sides of the coin. Now, that last day, so first of all, our yeshuv, Moshav Katif, was privileged to be there longer. Remember, it was a year like this year, that Tisha B'Av fell on Sunday, even though then it was a nidche. But Tisha B'Av fell on Sunday. And they came in, as the soldiers started coming in on Monday. They started removing the 20 yeshuvim on Monday, and they were very systematic. Now, we finally, we didn't know this until it happened, but we got permission to stay there, to be one of the last ones, second to last ones, because we had a bar mitzvah that Shabbos, one of the families. They allowed us to stay there for Shabbos Nachamu. And I could just say one thing, that Friday night, I remember going out of my house and looking to the neighboring yeshuv that we used to see, that was Ganei Tal, all dark, and the first thing that popped into my head was Rabbi Akiva looking at the Beis HaMikdash there with the fox coming out. And that's what I felt then. And knowing that, look, it's Shabbos Nachamu, how appropriate, the Nechama. And then the next Sunday was when they came to us. And so we agreed, the Yeshuv voted on how we would conduct ourselves. So the very simple rule. In the public domain, no one, any violence, nothing. Zero, you have to behave. If you're inside of your house, you do whatever you want, be dragged out, whatever. Outside has to be no eggs being thrown, no. Okay. So the funny thing is that we understood this afterwards, that the army did their homework in a way. And the troublemakers, they sent more soldiers. When that morning, only 2 of them come to my house. I go, okay, so they probably got the inside information. I was some type of wimp or something. Okay, but whatever. And we had 2 soldiers coming to our house, and they come in and we sit around the table. And let's just say that I remember what sticks out in my head. I think there was a reporter who came in to ask me permission to come in also, that we had a 3-month-old son at the time. And the soldier says, "What a cute kid." So then I had the chutzpah, quote unquote, to say, "Yeah, and you're kicking him out of his, new home." The soldiers then. So you asked about the last day, that last week. I said I'm not even going to describe how much I cried. I remember one thing which always was I would say the trigger for crying was because we were one of the last ones out. To go out of Gush Katif, you had to go by our yeshuv. And what we used to do is every day we used to go out to the and the people that were leaving from other communities, we used to basically stand outside with signs, giving them chizuk and everything. And I remember then I used to cry. It was like the hardest thing to watch. It was like mamish brought back a lot of memories of the Jews going into Gullus. That's what and it was hard. Remember, it's the 3 weeks and it's hot and it's just. And I remember it was a very hard week. And then our turn came. And I remember we did I would say, very respectful. After the soldiers came to the houses, we decided that we're going to have one last mincha in the shul. And who spoke at mincha besides the Rav? David Chatuel spoke. And what he said there, I always remember, he was one that lost his whole entire family. That Baruch Hashem today, I can say with a lot of pride that he's a neighbor. He's remarried, 6 kids. And that's what he spoke. Then that was right. That was a year after the tragedy. And he gets up there and says, listen, when a tragedy happens to someone, you have a choice. You could stay down and depressed and under the covers, or you could get up and live your life. And he says, he told the people there, that's what he decided to do, to get up and live. And that's what we says, that's what you're going to have to do. It's going to be hard at the beginning, but you have to get up and live. Life is not over. You have to keep on living. And with daven mincha, we took the Sifrei Torah out, which was very hard to see also, onto the buses. And that became, I told people, it always became the longest day of my life. We left. Now, we knew most probable that they would let us back to pack, because no one packed. No one had any koach to pack. Hardly anyone packed. But we didn't know for sure. So we left our houses as is. My wife and the kids went on the bus. I drove the car with one of my kids, and different stations. We left Gush Katif. We went to Kibbutz Saad. They gave us the pictures there. People look like they're like just drained. And I remember that day, after that, we went through Tzomet Masmia. We went to the Kotel. That became a thing that every yeshuv that was thrown out, they went to go to the Kotel, and people used to greet them there. Rav Greenberg, the Rosh Yeshiva of Churban, I remember he was there that night. It was like already 1 a.m. We got to a girls' high school up north. That's where our community did not know where we're going to go yet. There were communities that made deals with the government. That was a whole other discussion. Should you make the deals or not? Our community did not make a deal. Early, the government arranged that we would go to, it was still vacation. It was school, was still out, to one of the girls' high schools up north. But I remember I'll say this on the podcast, but I remember even falling asleep at the wheel. I mean, this was like 3 a.m. and luckily, Baruch Hashem, I woke up, but this was like, I said, the longest day of my life. I'll never forget it. I will remember one thing, which officer from Miluim, still until today, I don't even know how he found out, how he knew but I get a call from him and he says, I know what you're going through today. I'm just calling to give you chizuk. It was like I'm driving, so, oh my gosh. Yeah. And that was Sunday night. We got there. It was like the pictures of us getting out of the cars with our suitcases, pictures like if the refugees in Europe. And then I remember it was already 4 a.m. So we down Matzikin. We slept like all morning. And then they told us that we were able to go back there the next day on Tuesday to pack. And the packing was a story in itself. The packing was, so my wife didn't go back. She was with the kids. My son did not want to go back. My 13-year-old did not want to go back. It was too hard for him. I took my father-in-law and my cousin. The 3 of us, they gave us 24 hours to pack the entire house. They gave every family 2 containers. You have to fit everything into 2 containers. And like the joke was that after everything was packed, then we finally, after we went back to Tisha B'Av, and then finally the containers came. Like my wife used to find stuff in crazy places. I was just throwing stuff in the boxes, no particular order. Just it was like you had like a stop clock. You knew you had to fit. There were soldiers there that were helping us. I have a picture of them helping me take out all my svarim, the shas and everything there. So Mazah, this is so heavy. It's Sifrei Kodesh or heavy. And that was the last time that Wednesday, from Tuesday to Wednesday, was, I remember driving out for the last time.
So hard to go back to those moments, and I want to talk about the tkufa afterwards and how you guys sort of dealt with that. And obviously, everyone held it differently. There were some, there was a whole spectrum of reactions of traumas. And going back to what David Chatuel said about the resilience. So I wonder if you could describe that in the weeks, months, and years.
Sure. But first, I'll tell you a story, even though she denies it. My daughter, who at the time was 15, she asked me a question like the last week, 2 weeks there. But what was the story of Gush Etzion? Gush Etzion. So I had a feeling why she was asking. I said, yeah, Gush Etzion also, 1948, we had to leave. And Baruch Hashem, 19 years later, we came back. And it's remarkable, Yaakov, because we came back to Gush Katif 19 years later, last year. We were back there. I mean, Baruch Hashem, the army, I have stories of neighbors of mine that were little kids then, that they, because of the war, they were zochet to go back. So it's something, I know in Kabbalah 19, and like you said, it was, now for us, the Katz family, it was even worse, because what happened was, so we were at the girls' high school. The girls come back at the beginning of school year. The girls slept in tents, by the way. We were in their rooms, and they're unbelievable. I said the kids did the Mesiras Nefesh of everyone during that time, like now during the war, very similar. To how the teenagers showed unbelievable strength, and but then our community did not know where they were going, and the kids had to start school, and I needed to work, and Karen Biana did tell me. So what ended up happening was that you could say we left for the second time. That means we cried again, because when we left the yishuv to go, but we told the yishuv that wherever you decide to go, we want to be part of you. So wherever you go, reserve us a caravan, caravilla, whatever you want to call it. And so we went back to Caribbean. And then my wife used to take the kids. So when they were there, our community was there through the Chagim. And then after the Chagim, they moved to one of the hotels in Ashkelon. And they were there until Pesach. And Pesach, the yeshuv, the community moved to where they are today, Amatzia, in these caravillas, basically. So we used to go, and they did set aside for us a caravilla. It's interesting. I think my teenagers there, I think for them it was a trauma because what they experienced, but even the little ones, so every family was able to have therapy. They used to talk about it. It wasn't easy, but the fact, I think, that number one, most of the community stayed together. Out of the 70 families that we were living in Gush Katif, if I'm not mistaken, 556 moved with us. There were people at the time, there was an opportunity for them to decide what they want to do, so they left. The Achdus, there was a big part in keeping together, and not every community was zoche for that. Not everyone was privileged to keep together, and some of those communities had a harder time. We were able to keep together, Baruch Hashem. And of course it was hard, okay? But going back to the Lo Nishkach, I think one thing when I came back to Kerem, one of the things was that I like to talk about it. After any time I had a chance, I would speak about it. That was my therapy. Back in Gush Katif, the last 3 months, the Jerusalem Post approached me to write a blog for them. And that every day I used to go in, and that was my therapy, to write this blog, what was going on. So there are people who didn't like to talk about it at all. Listen, we know stories of families, divorces, and people getting sick, and people committing suicide. I mean, things were to not be taken lightly. But I say, you had to make a decision, and of course it was hard. And the fact that I think they learned a lesson, when I say the people living Gush Katif, if you want people to remember, you have to do things. You have to be proactive. And the only way to be proactive is if you start commemorating and making sure people don't forget, documenting everything. Because one of the mistakes after Yamit, after Sinai leaving, was that no one knew about anything. Here they made it. I could say I have the privilege of sitting on the board of the Gush Katif Heritage, and they are very, very proactive. There's 2 museums, one in Nitzan, one in Yerushalayim, and they have activities all the time. This time of year, like you said at the beginning of the podcast, they use this time to have next week. There's a big conference they have every year in Yad Binyamin. They invite Knesset members and that. And the next Thursday, the 31st, I'm saying this, they have here. They used to do it on the border, but the last couple of years, and before the war, security-wise with the rockets, so they have it in Sderot now. They invite the whole, that's like the day of commemorating the Gush Katif, what happened there. So they do a lot of things to make sure that Gush Katif will never be forgotten. And I'll go on record by saying that I think the fact of what they're doing now, this will never happen again. I mean, I'm not a Navi, but I said it will never happen again in Yudah and Shomron. The fact that it got so much attention and seen commemorating and showing how it was a mistake, and then it will never look. I could be wrong, of course. Okay, over Mashiach will be here soon, so it won't even be a question. But the fact that Gush Katif is out there, and the war these last 22 months has even made it even more the awareness of of Gush Katif, because the whole thing, like I tell people, Yaakov, and I try to be apolitical when I take my groups around. October 7th, 2023 started in the summer of 2005. It's that decision that was made in summer 2005. It took 18 years, but what happened in October 7th, direct result of what happened that summer. And I think most people agree to that. The fact that we left and what happened afterwards, and Hamas takes over, and just one thing leads to another until it all blows up in October 7th.
Right. So, I mean, you described, these awful scenes, and you said it brought you back to, dark times, Jewish history, refugees, and Rabbi Akiva, and all these things. And I certainly understand that. And then on the other hand, right, you think of them as refugees. Where are they going? They're going to, on all objective levels, a beautiful Jewish homeland. So how do you find that nuance between, on the one hand, it's a Tisha B'Av story, on the other hand, it's not?
So I think that was something which we used to always tell the kids. Like, remember when that was one of the things I had, besides being a private with my family, with the kids in the high school. So what do you tell them at a chinuch level? And part of what we tried to tell them always was that, unlike other darker times, thank God, no one here is getting killed, and your family is not falling apart. You're just going to go somewhere else in Eretz Yisrael. Now, of course, the pain of losing everything, and some people live there 30 years, 40 years. Bottom line is you're going to go somewhere, and you're still, and like when people ask, we used to ask back then, forget about now since the war, what would you go back to Gush Katif? So I said, listen, I think there's a double whammy here, because Baruch Hashem, what happened was, as a result of we built new communities. So when we will go back to Gush Katif, and I believe we will, who will go back? Our children, grandchildren. So they'll be in Gush Katif, and there'll be all these beautiful communities that were built also. And I think that's an important thing, because to understand that, unlike when we didn't have a homeland, when we didn't have a Medina, but because we had something. And the mashal that a lot of the Rabbeim used to give, remember the Rabbeim in Gush Katif used to speak a lot. So, the famous mashal of, try to tell a kid, look, one of the other slogans was, Ama netzach lo mefachem derech haruka. Now, what's a derech haruka? Now, that's the same thing now, 22 months. Because if you remember going back to October 7th, people said it's going to take a long time. The problem in Israel, maybe on the savlanut, the people want things done now. 6-day war, 6 days, 12 days in Iraq. Not everything goes like that, okay? But derech haruka, so it's a famous mashal that, they used to ask, Ma yeh basof. Now, I heard this from, I think it was Ray Kamenetsky, who was the rabbi of Gush Katif, still is considered the rabbi of the most of the communities in Gush Katif. So he says, Ma yeh basof, you open up Chagai's Charia Malachi, the beautiful nevuahs of what's going to be, Mirz Hashem, when the Geula comes. But you're in that tunnel. There's the light at the end. Exactly what's at the end. Now, sometimes you're in the tunnel and you see the light. Sometimes you take a turn and it's dark again. But that's been Am Yisrael's journey. So, of course, there was the whole Gush Katif story was a speed bump. Okay, hurt a lot. Okay, that's going to be okay eventually, and that's very important. Now, look, there were people who took it to an extreme, and, for example, stopped saying Tefillah L'Shlom Medina. So I once had an argument. I once had a discussion. I said, I don't understand. The Medina, the country, is a lot stronger than one prime minister that makes one decision. He's around for just about the Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael are a much larger thing than just one decision. Why? I don't say, by not saying Shlosh Medina, what do? You're hurting yourself. I mean, you believe still, you're angry at Sharon. You're angry at the government that passed this whole thing, that made the decisions. But why angry at the Medina? So you said the Medina represents, but okay, but the army, the Medina, those are all things that are much more. Here, last night I heard on radio an interview with one of the Chaver Knesset, I won't mention who, that didn't go into the army when he was 18 because he was angry about. Now he wants to go in because he feels that. But yeah, that was a knee-jerk reaction to what happened then, okay? But most of the people did army at then. It might took them a little longer because they came to a sense and said, like, who am I punishing here? So, like you said, the nuance between, so yeah, on one hand, you had a Churban of a beautiful thing that you had going there. But at the same time, you understood that, okay, life's not over. You have this. And like, I still believe we'll be back there. I think, people have to understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has his own ways of doing things, and we don't, he doesn't work for us. Okay. Well, but you see, who cannot, at these last 20 months, these last 22 months, and look and see that the Geula is coming a lot faster than it was beforehand. And in Mirza Hashem, we'll be back. Okay, look, we're talking now, Yaakov, and a mile away. Look, who would have thought that we have, there are limb in Gush Katif there, in Aza, and Mirza Hashem, they'll stay there. So, Baruch Hashem.
Yeah. I also really just enjoyed your description of how these new communities that were built, Amatzia is a beautiful community. I'm Baruch Hashem Zochad, live in
B'nai
Tzarim,
exactly.
where I came a little late in the game 15 years later, but they built a beautiful, beautiful community through that pain and through that trauma. So it's really amazing to see. I'm going to ask you one more question. We're running a long time, and this could be its own podcast, but we're sitting here, as you mentioned, we're in Sderot, and the history of this city is very much intertwined with the history of Gush Katif. So maybe if you try to give us like a very brief overview of the yeshiva, the city, and how that story is intertwined with that story.
Of course. So first of all, what you said about the peoples. A lot of people who started Gush Katif moved from Sderot to Gush Katif to start Gush Katif. And unfortunately, after the Gerush, there are some people who moved from Gush Katif back to Sderot. So Sderot, remember, when we used to live in Gush Katif, we used to go through Sderot. A lot of people used to come to Sderot to do even their shopping, okay? Because this was like considered the big city, which is like a little joke because it's like, it's like everything's relative, okay? But now, like I said, the rockets started in Sderot in 2001. Okay, the people in Gush Katif then were also suffering from the mortar. I have in my living room like a mortar that fell in our backyard, okay, in Gush Katif. But after we left Gush Katif, the city that suffered the most, without any question, is Sderot. Because Sderot, they're a mile away, less than a mile away. So of course they're the ones that suffered the most. It's interesting. The yeshiva came here in 1995, 30 years ago. I always say that they were makdim to falamaka because, and that's the thing which I think is important, coming full circle with the Gush Katif thing. If I mentioned before, Yaakov, that Gush Katif, you have to say like, key words that describe it. Just throw out, so, bullet points. So I said emuna and bitachon and that. And I think that's something which for sure is true of Sderot as well. And the yeshiva, I think, has a big part. If you look now at 22 months after October 7th, you look at the down south, what has happened here in the communities, Sderot, without a question, is basically the best case scenario. Most of the people are back. The city's alive. Again, they're nervous because they know still Hamas is still there and they want to see Hamas not be there. And that's going to be very interesting to see because the people here have said it, that they don't want to have Hamas. If that's going to be the case, I don't know how many people are going to stay here, God forbid. But right now the city's growing. There's close to 40,000 people here, Baruch Hashem. But the yeshiva has a very, very big part in what goes on here. The yeshiva being in the middle of the city, it's really, like I say, a beacon to everything. The yeshiva is very connected to the community. A lot of our rabbeim in the yeshiva are rabbis of shuls throughout. And I think that has a lot to do with the emunah and bitachon that's here. Some of the staff was in Gush Katif as well. So it was a closeness geographically to Gush Katif. It's a closeness for sure, hashkafa-wise, to what Gush Katif stood for. I wouldn't be surprised if we do go back to Rabbi Fendel. The Rosh Yeshiva has been talking about making a branch of the yeshiva in Aza on the beach over there, which I don't put anything past him. I could see that happening. Maybe not now. So I could definitely see when go back there, making a branch of Yeshivat Sderot over there. But that's one thing where I tell people that you have to be optimistic. When you see a city like Sderot, what it's gone through, and again, the city of Sderot, what it's gone through, knowing what happened to Gush Katif, and seeing everything we've gone through the last 22 months, you have to say, okay, we were hit, and it hurts, and we've paid a very, very steep price. The yeshiva itself has lost 6 alumni, like every Hesed yeshiva has paid the price. But at the end of the day, okay, you get up and you say, but look, but Baruch Hashem, we're here. Our answer is more Torah. Look around Sderot, more building. Okay, so more Torah, more chesed. So, just That's our answer to them. Our enemies don't understand that. We have that secret weapon of the Ruach. I said, that's the Ruach. Things ago, the Ruach in Gush Katif was unbelievable. Like everything happened. Like I told people, try to explain logically how that my students that year were able to even go and do their Bagrut test. Eventually, I mean, after everything going through, also on an emotional level, on a security level. Okay, explain that. These kids, there's that Ruach there that people don't understand. I used to say that if we talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim, that b'schut nashim tzidkaniyot, there was the women. I say in Gush Katif, what kept that last year especially going was the Noar, was the youth. They were the ones strengthening their parents. They were the ones taking the initiative and everything. You see, that's what people say today also. People thought, oh, this generation, okay, there's the TikTok generation, they're on their cell phones all the time. But look what they've done. Look what these kids, these 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds have done in Gaza. Look at the fighting, okay? And we've paid a price also. So you have to be very careful how you judge people a lot of times. You don't know you maybe see the outside, you don't know what's inside that ruach there. And I think because of that ruach, we could all be, very, very optimistic with a lot of tikva that things are going to be okay.
It's a great point to get to. So thank you so much. Let's finish off with a quick lightning round, 3 short questions, 3 short answers. We're in the summer. We have nice long Shabbos afternoons. What do you like to do at that time?
Learn and spend time with the family.
Great. You mentioned the Nevi'im, Chagaz, Hayamachi, and all the Nevi'im, but if you could recommend another sefer that gave you perspective during, before, or after, about, Churban, trauma, resilience.
So I taught this year, I taught this year in Shalavim for women, and it gave me chizuk during this, Ema Barim Smecha. So definitely, 100%.
Okay, if you were forced to leave your job, I know you love your job, but if you're forced to choose any other job tomorrow, say maybe you dreamed of as a kid or anything else you had an itch to try, what would that be?
Mayor of Sderot. I can control it. No. That's the joke here. No, just that question. We want to move here. That's how I asked my wife during the war. It was something that, you see my lifestyle. I'm always looking for the next challenge. Okay. But like people sometimes think, what, you at Talo Garpo? So I say, I take it as a compliment that I've gotten to know the city. And and I'll be very happy to take anyone, who wants to come see the story here and hear about all the Nisim and yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rav Ari.
Thank you, Yaakov. Thank you.